That's my wife laughing. uh, so, like I mentioned, I'm going to record this meeting. That way, you guys can refer back to this. I will post this meeting in the GE assignment module that's already on Canvas right now. I have published it, but let me just double check, make sure I'm not lying to you all. Yeah, it's been published. Okay. So the GE assignment module has been published. Activity 8 is also published, but that is in this week's module, which also contains the ANOVA PowerPoint and video associated with that. You guys will be turning in activity 8 online. You won't have to print it out and bring it to me next Tuesday. It's just entirely online, so you can just fill it out after class is over today, and then you'll be done with it. Super simple. So today what we're going to do is first we're going to go over the instructions for the GE assignment, kind of go over the expectations. There's a rubric that I'm going to go over as well. I'm going to show you a practice write-up as well as show you how to analyze the data using practice data, but it's the exact same format using the exact same number of participants, just slightly different in terms of the numbers and the labels involved, but everything else is identical. Before I get started, are there any questions or anything that you guys need to ask me or clarify with me before we start? Excuse me. Okay, so I'm going to start by opening up the GE assignment instructions. This is available to you all in the GE assignment module. All of the information that I'll be showing to you today will be. So yeah. Okay, so to start, this assignment does address the outcome 3 for area B4 in terms of your GE assessment situation. So what you'll be doing is that each person will choose between using an independent samples t-test or dependent samples t-test data set. Now there are 2 different ones. They're different from the independent than they are from the dependent. So you'll choose the data set that you want to work with and analyze and make predictions regarding that data. There's prompts below that I'll get into shortly, but once you've analyzed the data on Excel, which I am going to show you how to do today, it's part of the reason why I'm recording. Once you've analyzed it, then and done the appropriate hypothesis test, so that's either an independent or a dependent samples t-test, you'll also create a bar graph and write up a short results section and discuss the possible implications or practical applications of the data that you've obtained. And again, with the practice write-up, I'll give you an example, show you what that kind of looks like in terms of possible implications or practical applications. That'll be clearer. So not only are you submitting this assignment to me through Canvas, which it will be submitted online through a plagiarism checking tool, but it'll also be submitted to your e-portfolio. I do not have access to your e-portfolio. I am not responsible for turning in your GE assignment to your portfolio. So I advise that when you submit it to me, you also just submit it to your e-portfolio Canvas right after, or just do them both at the same time. Do one and then the other. It doesn't matter which one you do first, just as long as they're both submitted. Again, I cannot turn in your submission to your e-portfolio. Only you have access to it. So it's your responsibility to make sure that you turn it in to both myself and your e-portfolio Canvas. So as far as the instructions themselves, so you'll start by choosing a prompt, which is below. I'll show you those prompts once we get there. And you'll analyze that set of data that accompanies it. You'll compute either an independent or dependent samples t-test on Excel, depending on which prompt you choose, and report your results. So the video that I mentioned here, you can watch the video posted on Canvas. That's literally the video that I'm recording right now. So hi, future you. How you doing? Hope you're doing good. So I'm going to show you guys how to calculate these things in Excel so you have the access to it. If you have any questions, or if you forgot, you can always refer back to this video so you can get that reminder. So once you've analyzed the data, like I said, you'll need to write up your results. Now, essentially what you're doing is writing a kind of pared back results section of an APA style paper. So what you'll first do, this is the general outline. You'll want to start with number 1 and just go in order 1 through 6 in terms of what you need to report. So the first thing you'll need to do is explain what's going on. So that's going to be where you describe the groups that are being tested. So depending, the independent and dependent samples prompts have 2 different groups. So they're not the same for both. They're fairly similar, and they're both examples that we've covered or at least discussed as examples in class. So you should be fairly familiar with them. But you'll need to describe what the groups are, what they consist of, as well as what's being used to compare them. Now, spoiler alert, they're both tests are compared across exam scores. And so the scale that I'm referring to is referred to in the prompt, where the exams are up to worth 100 points. So that's the scale that I'm referring to when it says what is being used to compare them. It's an exam, and the scale it goes up to 100 points. So next you'll need to report the descriptive statistics for each group. So this includes the means and the sample standard deviations for group A and group B, regardless if those are between or within subjects groups, regardless if that is an independent or a dependent samples t-test you're looking at. You will need to report the descriptive statistics for both groups, as well as their sample sizes. So how many people were in this group? How many people were in that group? I need to see all of this information present. Next, you'll be reporting the t-test results, be it independent or dependent, again, whichever you choose. And there's a specific way to do that, which you can see at the bottom of the page is how you do it, and I'll cover that in a moment. Next, you'll need to report the results in English. So we know, if you have a p-value equal to or less than alpha, you're going to reject the null hypothesis. What I mean when I'm asking for the results in English is not to just say, oh, the null hypothesis was rejected, and then move forward to the next point in the outline. Results in English means, okay, if you rejected the null hypothesis, what is this telling you between the 2 groups? Are they different? You'll also need to tell me what the groups are again, not just say, oh, the groups are different, but the group that was given a study guide performed drastically better than the group without a study guide, or the groups, regardless of study guide, performed the same. Just depending on what you do regarding that null hypothesis will determine what you say regarding what this means for the groups. So when I say results in English, it's essentially you telling someone who's not taking statistics what happened. If you tell your uncle or your friend who's not in a statistics class, oh, I rejected the null hypothesis, they're not going to know what that means. But if you say, oh, it turned out that the exam scores were higher with the group that had a study guide compared to the group that didn't, that makes more sense. So that's what I mean by the results in English. So implications and or practical applications of the data or of the results is essentially just how can people in the field use this moving forward? Now, the examples that we have, the prompts that we have are student related. So I chose to be more specific and stated, how could students and or professors use this information moving forward? How can this help them? So it just depends on, we'll get more into it as we get down there, but it's just, how can we use this information moving forward? What does it mean when you rejected a null? Turns out, wow, using a study guide really helped in terms of exam scores. How can professors or students use that information moving forward? And then finally, the last thing you want to include is a bar graph depicting your groups. So this will include the means of the groups. I'll also show you how to set up the bar graph so it can pretty much do most of the work for you. You'll just have to do some minor edits to tweak it to exactly my specifications. But again, I'll show you how to do those tweaks as well. So Any questions so far before I start getting into a little more detail in regards of some of these specific points in the outline? Are there any questions regarding any of these 6 points, about anything at all? Excuse me. Okay, so all t-tests. So next I'm going to show you guys how to report t-tests in proper APA format. This is how you'll need to report the t-test in your paper, in your write-up. It's actually super simple, and it's identical regardless of if you have an independent or a dependent samples t-test. So how it needs to be written is a lowercase italicized t, and then parentheses immediately following with the degrees of freedom contained within, equals the t statistic, which you will get through our calculations in Excel, comma, lowercase italicized p, this indicates the p-value, and equals 0.xx. So just numbers there. So just to kind of fill in, just an example here, this isn't any of the data that is used in the t-test we have here, but just as an example. So here for this problem, or for this particular t-test, they had a degrees of freedom of 56. Their calculated t statistic was 2.17, and their p-value was 0.21. Once you have the information, which again, we'll calculate today in Excel, it's just a matter of plugging it into this setup here, and guarantee as long as you follow that, you reported your t-test results in proper APA format. So just keep this in mind. Another thing I want to show you is just how to properly create a graph, or really what a graph should look like. I'll show you how to create a graph in Excel. But you'll need to include, again, this is also APA format. You'll need to include figure 1 and the title of the graph above the graph itself in your paper proper. You'll want to make sure that there are solid black X and Y axis lines. So, oh, it went away. I'll have to update that. I copied the graph from Excel and then I deleted the data, and I forgot to ensure that it was in the instructions, but I can update that. But there should be solid X axis line and Y axis line. There's labels on both of the axes. So you'll see on the Y axis label, there is depression scores. And then for the X axis label, there's pre-post test. There's no grid lines in the middle of the graph. Now, obviously, there's also no bars in the middle of the graph here, but like I said, that was just a weird, when I deleted the data from Excel, it deleted the graph here as well. But notice how there's no grid lines in this graph. I'll show you guys how to delete that in Excel. It's pretty easy. Figure 1 is included first, and then the title immediately follows, italicized and capitalized like a title typically is. So you'll see here, this figure 1 is bolded, and then immediately underneath it, it has the title of the graph in italics, and it's capitalized like titles usually are, with most of like the big words for not the prepositions like in or whatever you'd call and, but those words aren't capitalized, but the major words are. So essentially what you're used to creating for how you're used to capitalizing titles, that's how your title of your graph is going to be capitalized. And it also needs to be italicized. Any questions? Again, I'll update this. So for the prompts that you have to choose from, each of these prompts has a corresponding Excel sheet. Again, all of the information is in the GE assignment module in our Canvas. You'll see an independent samples t-test data sheet. It's an Excel workbook, and you'll see the same for a dependent samples t-test worksheet. Again, it's Excel. So you're going to choose one of these 2 prompts below. For the independent samples t-test, it states for the first exam of the semester, 20 students in a Psych 42 class were provided with a study guide to prepare for the exam. The other 20 were not provided with a study guide. This exam was worth 100 points. The scores were compared between the two groups. So we can tell that's an independent samples t-test because we have two samples there. We have two numbers of the 20 students and the other 20 students, indicating that's a between subjects design, like our activity from last week, where we were kind of looking for those differences between independent and dependent. This one, we use 20 and 20. And that second set of 20 is 20 other students. They are different from the first 20 mentioned. So this is the independent samples t-test prompt. And then the dependent samples t-test prompt is 40 students in a Psych 42 class. Were given the final exam on the first day of instruction, and their exam scores were recorded. After completing Psych 42, the same 40 students, so we can tell, again, we have it mentions those 40 students twice, but the difference with dependent samples t-test is it's saying the same 40 students. So it's not a separate set of 40. We have the same 40 doing both of these things. So after completing Psych 42, the same 40 students took the final exam again on the last day of instruction. The final exam was worth 100 points. Scores were compared between the first and last time students took the final exam. So those are the two prompts that you have to work with. Again, each student has their choice to choose either doing the independent samples t-test and using the data associated with that, or the dependent samples t-test and the data associated with that. There's the same number of participants or students in each. There's 40 in independent and 40 in dependent. So they're the same size. So it's really just up to your choice, honestly. Now the rubric. So in terms of how it's going to be graded. So the way I'm going to grade it is the total assignment is worth 40 points. 5 of those points is going to be based on the outline and if you followed it. That outline is what's highlighted up here, the numbered 1 through 6. So did you explain what's going on, followed by the descriptive statistics and then the t-test results and describing what those results mean in English? Did you explain what the practical applications are? And finally, do you have a bar graph, you know, putting the cherry on top, or rather at the bottom of the sundae, since that's the last thing you're putting. So 5 points is going to be graded on if you follow that basic outline above. Formatting is referring to what your paper looks like. So I'll show you guys the practice write-up as well, so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about here. But your paper will need to have the heading of results that should be bolded and centered. Did you properly label your bar graph? So that is going to be kind of referenced here. Again, I'll update that. So there's actually a bar graph there, but in terms of how it's labeled, I mean, it's pretty solid. You know, did you properly label the bar graph? Do you have numbers here? Or is it just blank? There should be numbers. Do you have your X and Y axes labeled, etc.? Are all your decimals rounded to the nearest hundredth? This is also going to be counted in formatting. So again, this is 2 decimal places. So based on your data, you might have a standard deviation of 2.57789 or whatever. If you put 2.57789 in your paper, you're going to be dinged for formatting. It needs to be to 2 decimal places. So round it to 2 decimal places, 2.878, since it was 77. So yeah. Okay. So next, you'll be graded on statistics. Obviously, this is a statistics class, so most of the points are going to be allocated to, did you do the statistics right? So this is, did you use the correct test of independent or dependent? Honestly, as long as you know what prompt you're using and use the associated data set with that, you should not have a problem with that. It's pretty much spelled out for you which test you're going to need to use. Next is, did you include the descriptive statistics? So did you tell me what the means of each of your groups were? Did you tell me what the sample standard deviations were, as well as their sample sizes? That's part of the statistics as well. Inferential statistics, of course, is the independent or dependent samples t-test, and the descriptive, if you remember back from like week 2 or something. The descriptive is kind of what the data looks like. So that's the means and standard deviations, etc. But I need to see the mean, standard deviation, and sample size for each group. And of course, not only do I need to know that, you analyze the data correctly. So I can check in terms of reading your paper if you did the statistics correctly or not. I also want to see that you describe what it means in English. I don't just want to see, oh, the results were statistically significant, and then you move on to something else. I want you to explain what rejecting the null or what having statistical significance means in that, or what retaining the null means with that study. So that will also be a part of the statistics, not only being able to analyze them, but being able to interpret them as well. Finally, the graph is worth 5 points. So do you have the graph? Well, first off, do you have a graph? If you don't, instantly, that's 5 points off your write-up. But does it include both of your groups? Is it labeled clearly on the X and Y axes? Is it there, basically? As long as you do the graph properly, you shouldn't have any issues with that. And again, today's activity I'll show you how to do that. And finally, 10 points are going to be allocated to the details. So this is where, did you clearly state what your groups were, and explain what they're being compared across? So for both of these, you'll see that it is being compared. Exams are what's being tested for each of these. So for the independent samples t-test, it's, oh, they're taking an exam with or without a study guide. So we have the exam as a central thing. And then for the dependent samples t-test, they're just taking the final exam twice. So not only will you need to state the groups of, oh, before and after taking Psych 42 or with and without a study guide, but you also need to tell me, okay, what are we comparing? So for, it's either the final exam or just the first exam, depending on which test you choose to go with, the independent or dependent. And then, did you explain the possible implications or practical applications for the results? And I'll give you guys an example of that using the practice write-up. I don't want to give too much away in terms of your GE assignment. But of course, if you have any questions, you can feel free to drop by my office hours and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Right. So that is the instructions for the assignment. Before we start going into how to calculate independent and dependent samples t-test in Excel, and before I show you guys the practice write-up, are there any questions? Okay. So I'm going to start with showing you guys how to calculate this in Excel. So here I have the practice data. This is not the data that you're going to be using, but as far as the setup of it, it's the exact same. I'm just going to delete this. Yes, yes. And then yes, yes. So we're going to start with the independent. This is the exact same format as the independent samples t-test data that you will use, except it's just going to be different numbers and the groups will be different, of course. According to the prompt, we know it's not online and face-to-face, but I'm using this to show you guys how to do this, how to analyze this in Excel. It's actually a lot easier than it is doing it by hand, and I'll show you. So first off, what we need for the paper is we need to have not only the sample size, which is 20 and 20 for each. Not only can we see that, oh, we have 20 students in the online section, and then, oh, 21 to 40, so 20 students in the face-to-face section, but it also tells us that it will tell you that in the prompt as well, except it's not online and face-to-face, it's with or without a study guide. So we know the sample size for each is 20. Now we have to calculate the average and standard deviations, which again, this should be a bit of a throwback, but of course it's been a while. So I'll show you all how to do that. So of course you'll start by typing equals and then start typing in average. I double click it because otherwise you have to type out the whole thing and the open parentheses, and I'm just not that patient of a person. So that'll give me the online mean of 4.85. And then for standard deviation, I want to make sure I do it for a sample. So I want to make sure when I start typing stdev, I select the dev.s option. That is, as it says here, estimate standard deviation based on a sample. I'd point to, oh, here it is. Yeah. So there we go. And then I'm going to select the exact same data. And then I'm just going to do the same for the face-to-face. So again, equals average. And then standard deviation for the sample. And then I'm selecting the same numbers. Okay, so far, I don't know what that is. So far, I have my descriptives done. I know that here I can actually put n equals 20 and then n equals 20. That's just the sample size for online is 20. The sample size for face-to-face is online. Now I need to analyze, I need to compute the independent samples t-test. So one thing that you'll need to do for Excel, I'm going to use the data analysis tool pack, which is found in the data tab. And I go over here to data analysis. Now you might not have this on Excel yet, but I'm going to show you how to just put it on so you don't have to worry about it. So if you don't have this tab here, when you click on the data tab and over here where it says data analysis, if that is not showing up for you, what you'll need to do is go to file and then go to options. And then from there, it's going to have a whole bunch of stuff, blah, 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 but you'll go down to add-ins. I said add-ins. Okay. And then on the very bottom, it's a drop-down menu where it says Manage Excel Add-ons Go. You're going to click Go there. And then for me, it's already checked because I've already installed these, but you want to have both the Analysis Tool Pack and the VBA clicked as well. So you'll want both of these boxes checked and then click OK. And then once doing that, if you haven't already, then this tab should open up in your Data tab menu. So with all of that being said, now that we have the data analysis tool pack properly installed, just click on that and it's going to probably start you up here, but you'll scroll down to t-tests. So there's several different t-tests here. What we're going to do is well, that's a z-test right there. My apologies. We're going to do for an independent samples t-test, which is the example I'm showing you right now. You're going to do a 2 sample assuming equal variances. So you want to make sure this is selected. You'll click OK. And then it's going to show you some stuff. So I've already done this, but just to start fresh. So it's just going to ask you for the variable ranges. So what you'll do is you'll click the box for variable 1 will just be online, just because that's on the left and I read from left to right. So I'm going to select the numbers for my variable 1 range. So that's all my online numbers. And then I'll click the box for variable 2 range and select all the numbers for my second variable, for my second group, I should say, which is face-to-face. Okay. I don't have labels selected. That if I selected online as well, and face-to-face, I would select labels. But since there's a gap between the face-to-face data and the face-to-face label, it won't let me do it. It's going to be all weird about it. So just leave the labels unmarked. Just know which one is which. I know that my variable 1 data was the online, and then my variable 2 range was the face-to-face. So every alpha is set at 0.05, which is what we want to have it set to. So that's awesome. I'm going to select OK. And then it'll show you a different sheet. And from here, we have our t-test. We have our independent samples t-test calculated. Now, remember that from the instructions, there's a proper way to report t-tests. So that was t lowercase and italicized, degrees of freedom equals t-stat, and then P equals 0.xx. So I'm going to show you guys where you need to look on here to put that information in here. Again, this is what we need to have. So let's look at this and figure out what it is we're looking at. Well, first it tells us the means of our groups. So as we can tell, we've already done that, 4.85 and 6.55 respectively for online and face-to-face. But I mean, it'll also calculate the means for you. It also calculates the variance, but of course that's different from standard deviation. Now we can easily calculate standard deviation from this by just square rooting the variance for variables 1 and square rooting the variance for variable 2. But it gives us our variances. It tells us the sample size or the number within each group. Next, we'll have the degrees of freedom. This is what we need. So I'm just going to start writing this. So degrees of freedom is 38. Okay, equals. Now we have to find the t statistic, which is right underneath it at -2. Remember, we went around this to 2 decimal places. So 346 rounds up to 35. Then we want to put a comma, space, italicized, and lowercase p. Now we need to find the p-value. Now we need to find where that's at. So remember, we have 1- and 2-tailed tests. If you remember way back in the day when we discussed this a lot with z-scores and z-tests, we actually always have a 1- or 2-tailed test when it comes to hypothesis testing. It's just now that we've really started, I have a clear bias towards 2-tailed tests because oftentimes we can lose potential significant data if we only stick to 1 tail. So what we're going to want to do is find the p-value for a 2-tailed test. So here we have the p for a 1-tail as well as the critical value. And then we have the p-value for the 2-tail and the critical t-value as well. But in order to report this in proper APA format, we don't need to include the critical values for t. All we need is our p-value. So we have our p-value of 0.02. That is rounded because it's 0.024, which rounds to 0.2. And boom, if this were my independent samples t-test that I was going to report into my write-up, this would be how I would write it. All the information is there. So I have my degrees of freedom that's necessary. I have my t statistic that's necessary. And then I have the p-value for a 2-tailed test, which is also necessary. So all of those things just color coded right there. That's what I need to use. Okay. So now I'm going to show you guys how to do the bar chart, the bar graph for an independent samples t-test. And then I'll show you how to do a dependent samples t-test. So first off, there's a reason why I like to set up this little table here. This table is also set up with the appropriate information. Obviously, the groups will not be online and face-to-face, but there is a little table there for the data set you will choose, be it dependent or independent. This is still set up like this. But what I'm going to do is select actually, I don't even need to include mean. So I'm going to select the means for online and face-to-face, as well as the label online and face-to-face, or the words online and face-to-face. Next, I'm going to click insert and then go over to the near middle where it has the 2D column, just basically the picture that looks like a bar chart. And I'm just going to select this very first one. Aha. So, looking good. However, this is not quite the style that I want it to be in. If you recall from the instructions, there was supposed to be a solid black X and Y axis. There's also axes labels, and there needs to not be, it's kind of hard to see, but these little lines in the center here, those shouldn't be there. So it's actually fairly simple to do this, to format it in a way that it makes sense. First off, the title of the chart is not on the chart itself, but rather in the paper. I'll show you with the practice write-up what that looks like. But we have this so far. And I want to add axes titles. So I'm going to click on this blue or green plus sign over here to add chart elements. But if you don't have a blue plus sign over there, then you can also click on chart design here and then do add chart element and axes titles. And then there you go. But I'm going to title this class type, because that is the type of class that people are in, either in online or face-to-face. And next, I'm going to label this engagement scores. So what this is, I should have actually prefaced this before getting into it, but what this data is comparing student engagement scores, overall student engagement between online students and face-to-face students. So these numbers that each student is stating here, like, oh, a 3, a 4, a 2, a 7, etc. That's their overall engagement score. So that's what we're comparing here. That's necessary for you to kind of have some context. But now that we have that done, next thing I want to do is I want to double click on really anywhere to bring up this little side menu here. But I'm going to start actually by making those X and Y axes a solid black line. So to do this, I'm going to click on the numbers of my Y axis. Then I'm going to go to this paint bucket, go to line, click the button that says solid line. Now for yours, it might be blue, but you'll want, because I think that's just the default, but you'll want to change it to black. And then I'm going to do the same thing by clicking my groups here, just so this little rectangle is highlighted. And I'm going to do the same thing, click on solid line, and again, make sure that it's black. Okay, looking good. Next, I want to rotate the word engagement scores so I don't have to crane my neck to look at it. So I've clicked on the title engagement scores. And I'm going to, this box or this little pop-up should still be available on our right here. So I'm going to click on this little guy here, go to the drop-down box for text direction and just change it to horizontal. Ah, that's better. Now I don't have to crane my neck. And lastly, I want to remove those little lines in between. So I'm going to click on one of them and just hit backspace or delete, and then boom. There we go. The graph is in proper APA format. You'll see that I have the solid X and Y axis lines. My engagement scores, the Y axis is rotated so I don't have to crane my neck. I have labels for my X and Y axes outside of the groups themselves. There's no grid lines in the middle. There's numbers here to indicate the values on the Y-axis. Cool, awesome, nifty, bitchin'. It's as easy as that. So we've done it with the independent samples t-test. Now, spoiler alert, the dependent samples t-test isn't really that different. So let's go over to our dependent samples example. Again, this is going to follow this is pretty much exactly what your dependent samples Excel sheet is going to look like, just with different groups and different numbers, but everything else is pretty much identical. So again, we need to calculate those means and standard deviations for both of our groups. Here, if you remember our example from a ways back, where we were comparing the quiz scores between people who took notes with a laptop and people who took notes with pen and paper. Well, since this is our dependent example, it's a within subjects design. So participants were taking notes both using a laptop, and they took a little quiz on the lecture, and then they watched a slightly different lecture, not exactly the same one, because there might be some problems by watching the same lecture twice, and it's like, oh, I remembered it because I've seen it twice, not because of the notes that I took. But we give them a slightly different lecture, kind of in the same topic, and we quiz them again when they're taking notes in the other format. So we have 40 people again, 40 students total. And we're going to calculate the means and standard deviations for the scores for laptop note takers and the means and standard deviations for the quiz scores of longhand note takers. Okay, so this part that we're starting off with here starts exactly the same. It's just for dependent, we have to kind of scroll a little further down. But I mean, it's really not that big of a deal. So now I've calculated the average for my laptop note takers. I'm going to calculate my sample standard deviation. And I'm going to do the same for my longhand. So my average for them. And my standard deviation for them as well. Sample standard deviation, I should note. Okay. So that was pretty easy. Now that we have that taken care of. Oh, and the number in each group is, well, I mean, it's the same people. So while yes, we have 40 in each group, we do have just a total of 40. Oh, not 401 people, but we have a total of 40 people. With it being a within subjects design, that 40 is it tells the person, the researcher, the reader, that if it's a within subjects design, these same 40 people are being tested twice. So there's an overall sample size of 40 here. Now, again, you're going to be using the data analysis tool pack. I showed you guys how to do that, how to add that in for the independent, but just as a quick refresh, if you don't have it and you're doing the dependent, you want to open the file option, go down to options, click add-ins, go down here where it says manage and the drop-down menu that says Excel add-ins, click go, and make sure that these two boxes are checked. The analysis tool pack and the analysis tool pack VBA. Okay, so now we're going to go over to data and use that data analysis tool pack, except now instead of going for two sample assuming equal variances, which is what we did for an independent samples t-test, for a dependent samples t-test, we're going to select the option of paired to sample for means. Okay, so I've already done, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. I've already done this, but just to show you all again. Now for this, I will have labels because they are right next to it. Like I said, I didn't include labels for the independent samples t-test because if you remember on that data set, the second group didn't start until here. So the label of like face-to-face and then the first number for face-to-face, there's a big gap between it. So Excel, the analysis tool pack is a little iffy when you do it like that. It won't let you. So now granted, I don't have to include labels, but for this section I am, or for dependent I am. But as long as you keep note of which is variable 1 and which is variable 2, you shouldn't have an issue. So for for dependent samples t-test, we simply have to make sure that the hypothesized mean difference is 0. If you remember the null hypothesis for dependent samples t-test, it's the mean of the different scores is equal to 0. So that is what I'm typing. That's why there is a 0 here, because that is the hypothesized mean difference. That's what we always assume the null hypothesis is true going into it. So that is what the hypothesized mean difference is, 0. I'm checking the box that says labels because I did select the words laptop note takers and longhand note takers when I selected my data in these two groups. So there we go. It's going to open up a new worksheet. So let's do it. All righty. And just so we can see what it is that we're working with here. All right. So it looks very similar to the independent samples t-test readout. We'll see that, the means are in fact the same. Laptop was 4.925, laptop 4.925, longhand 5.15, longhand 5.15. So again, if you lose track of which one's which, you can always just kind of double check with the means you've already calculated on the previous page and see if they match up with the means here. Again, we have our variances. We have the observations in each. We also have Pearson's R here, fun fact. But again, remember when I stated that t-tests, regardless if they're independent or dependent, are reported the exact same way in APA. So again, we're going to use the dependent sample or the degrees of freedom. We're going to use the t-statistic, and we're going to use the two-tailed p-value. And again, that's going to look like t. The degrees of freedom is 39 equals our t-statistic is negative 0.38 when I round it. Oh wait, no, 37, excuse me. 37. My eyes skipped a beat. Comma, italicized and lowercase p for the p-value equals 0.71. And boom, I just properly formatted that. I've just reported my dependent samples t-test results in APA. Now, making sure that I include that bar graph, it's going to follow the same suit for an independent or a dependent samples t-test when it comes to this bar graph, because you're making a graph of the two groups. So whereas for an independent samples t-test, you have two groups that are different or containing different people. For a dependent, of course, it's the same group measured twice, but we still should have a bar graph depicting both groups here. So I'm going to delete that chart title. I'm going to select the option here to add axes titles. For the x-axis, I'm going to label this as the note-taking form. So what type of note-taking are you doing? For the y-axis titles, I stated that they were taking quizzes and being tested on their quizzes. So now to kind of clean this up a little bit. Oops. Okay. Again, I just double-clicked anywhere really on the graph, and that should bring up this chart here. I want to make a solid line and it's black. Click over here, a solid line, and it's also black. Now, one thing that I also want to make sure of is that my numbers start at 0. You'll notice for this graph here, it starts at 4.8, which makes it seem like there's a big difference between these groups, which with our p-value being as high as it was at 0.71, there's not a statistical difference between these groups. But looking at this graph, it looks like there's a huge difference. So we want to adjust the values that the y-axis displays here. So we'll want to click with the y-axis numbers selected. We'll want to select this option over here, the 3 bars. Click on axis options and change the minimum to 0. And then the maximum is 6. That's fine. Okay. Oh yeah. See, that's a lot better. That previous graph with it basically being zoomed in made it look like there's a huge difference. But when we get some more perspective, once we set the scale to be 0 to 6, then we're really seeing, yeah, there's not a difference between the groups. So always make sure that this is at 0 as well for your projects, for your assessment, for your assignments, for your write-ups. Okay, next thing I want to do is rotate this quiz scores here. So I'm going to go, oh, well, I'm already here, but I've clicked the title or the axis label of quiz scores, just what my y-axis is titled. And I want to flip that horizontally so I don't have to crane my neck. And then lastly, I'm going to delete those grid lines in the middle just by clicking on one and just hitting backspace, and boom, done. So that is how you'll do your analysis for your independent or dependent samples t-test. Again, you're not doing both. You're going to choose if you want to do the independent or the dependent samples prompt, but I just showed you guys how to do both because, well, you guys are going to do both. Just want to make sure that both prompts are being adequately described here. So are there any questions on the Excel portion of it? Excuse me. Yeah.
The one question I had was, is this like going to be posted somewhere, like the instructions on how to do it? Because I will not be able to I will not be able to fully remember all of this, I'm afraid.
So I'm recording this meeting right now. So what you can do is once I've uploaded the video, because it takes a little time to download and then I got to upload it to Canvas and blah, 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 blah. But it'll be in the GE assignment modules. So where you'll find the instructions that I've gone over, the different data sets for independent or dependent samples t-test. It's just all going to be in the module. And within that module will be this very video that we're all in right now. Woo. So you can open up that video and just scrub forward to the independent or the dependent samples t-test, whichever you choose, as a bit of a refresh for you. Okay. So any other questions before I show you guys a practice write-up? Okay. So the practice write-up is based on the independent samples t-test. So this is the for the practice data as well with the student engagement in online versus face-to-face classes. That's what this write-up is based on. So you'll notice in the instructions for the GE assignment, it said that you'll want to make sure that results is centered and bolded to start the paper. So you'll see that there. But it states, again, the kind of outline for it was starting off with kind of what are your groups and what are they being compared across and what was the scale. So we see this first paragraph is student engagement was compared between online and face-to-face statistics courses at Fresno State University. Student engagement was measured on a 1 to 10 scale. Online and face-to-face course takers were determined by their enrollment in the fall 2022 semester. So that those three sentences have told me not only what we're doing by stating that stating that student engagement is being compared between the groups of online and face-to-face statistics courses, but it's also telling me again what they're being compared with, which is student engagement. It's telling me the scale, it's on a 1 to 10 scale. Now, the reason why I ask this is because if you don't provide that context of scale, when you report on the means later, it's not going to tell me anything. It's just like, oh, the mean for student engagement was 6.55, but I'm thinking, okay, like I don't, is that good? I don't know. But if you give the reader and myself, if you state what that scale is, it provides more context to your data. So these means actually mean something. It's not just some arbitrary number that you've pulled out of Excel's ass. So, so it's giving me what they're being compared across and the scale. And then it's telling me the groups. So online and face-to-face course takers, how are we making these groups? How do we know who's in which group? Well, they're determined by their enrollment in fall 2022. So it's stated that these are between online and face-to-face statistics courses. So it's stating that the people that are in the online group were people who were enrolled in an online statistics course in the fall 22 semester. And then people that were in my face-to-face group, the 20 of those students were just enrolled in a face-to-face statistics course in fall 2022. Okay, so that's providing me that first part of the description. If you remember the general outline that we went over for the GE instructions, it stated, you know, what are your groups and what are they being compared to? What's the scale? Those first three sentences cover that beautifully and succinctly. Next, we get into the statistics. Now we're going to talk about the descriptive and the inferential. So it states here that an independent samples t-test was used to determine the difference between 20 online with a mean of 4.85 and a standard deviation of 2.43. And 20 face-to-face students, their mean was 6.55. Their standard deviation was 2.14. So that right there tells me not only what type of inferential tests I'm going to use, an independent samples t-test was used, but it also tells me the sample size of 20. It lets me know the descriptive statistics of each group. Again, as a reminder, those groups were online and face-to-face course takers. So it shows me the mean of online is in parentheses right here, immediately following online. So the mean and the standard deviation. And then face-to-face, the other group, and it tells me their descriptive statistics, their mean and standard deviation right there. Okay, awesome. The results, and then T degrees of freedom equals, oh, I hate how it actually kind of skipped to the next line there, but equals negative 2.35, comma, lowercase p for p-value equals 0.02. So the results indicate that there was statistical significance. Okay, so I've made a decision. I've done step 4 here of determining what to do with the null hypothesis. Keep in mind that when we have statistical significance, that also means that we've rejected the null hypothesis. You can state there was or there was not statistical significance. You can say the results indicate that we should reject the null hypothesis. Just let me know what to do. Let me know how you've made the decision. You can say that by clearly stating if you retained or rejected the null. You can do like it does here, where you're stating if you do or do not have statistical significance. Just as long as I can see that you've made a decision, I need to see that. So now I need to kind of think of, okay, so I've reported my statistics, my independent samples t-test. The next part's saying, okay, now what are these results in English? So that's what this very next sentence is saying. So face-to-face students, again, one group, had higher levels of student engagement than online students, the other group, as indicated by figure 1. Oh, it's also referencing the bar graph here, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, which is in a couple steps. Okay, so far, just these 2 paragraphs that we've covered right here have already covered what we're looking at. That's what this first paragraph here was, what the groups were, what they're being compared across, and what the scale of that comparison was. Then it's then it references the descriptive statistics. So the sample size of each group of the online and face-to-face students. It also tells me the means and standard deviations for those 2 groups. It tells me the T statistics. Well, first it tells me what test it does. So I also need to know if you did an independent or a dependent samples t-test. Be sure to explicitly state that. And you see that it does here, an independent samples t-test was used. But it reports those t-test results here, those independent samples t-test results, indicates what you're going to do regarding the null hypothesis, or if you have statistical significance, either or, like I said. And then it tells me what that all meant in English for someone who, if your grandma was going to read this and your grandma has no idea what statistical significance means or what a null hypothesis is, this will tell grandma what happened. Okay, so now the last part in terms of the writing is we need to state what the practical implication or practical applications or implications are. And so here's what this last paragraph is going to tell us. So looking forward, students can use the result of this survey to make the best choice in determining what modality of class they are looking to enroll in. Those who struggle with their engagement may fare better in a face-to-face class than online. So again, how are we making this assumption? We're seeing that there are our face-to-face students had higher levels of student engagement than our online students. And that difference was statistically significant. So it wasn't just by chance or, it's just these 20 that we picked. No, there's actually the type of class these students are enrolling in, be it face-to-face or online, that is having a big enough impact, that's causing a big enough difference between their engagement that it's statistically significant. It's not just by chance. There's something going on here. So maybe those who struggle with engagement, those students that struggle to remain engaged in their classes, they might do better to take a face-to-face class compared to an online class, since again, engagement for these students, for the face-to-face students, is statistically significantly larger. Okay. And then I also state that professors can also use this data to better tailor their courses for students' engagement with the material. So you can choose to really go into students and kind of talk about practical applications for them. Notice the practical application here that's mentioned is, oh, those who struggle with engagement may favor, so they're making the best choice to determine what type of class to enroll in, and then kind of providing some context to that. Those who struggle with engagement might actually work better in a face-to-face class compared to online. And then it also talks about what professors can do as well. So maybe with online classes, professors can maybe try to, go above and beyond to make that online component a little more engaging, since according to these results, according to the data that we've collected here, it seems like online students have just harder times engaging with the material in general. So this information can help professors in terms of how they're going to tailor their class. So this paragraph is just discussing the practical applications of the results that we found based on rejecting the null, based on having statistical significance, showing us that these face-to-face students, in fact, did have higher levels of engagement compared to online students. Well, we can kind of take that into context, kind of think about students in general and see how can that help them. Okay. So the last thing you'll need to include is, again, the figure or the bar graph. So for this, again, like the instructions stated, we want to have figure 1. Again, it's part of the paper. Notice how it's not a part of the graph here. It's something completely separate. After the last line of our last paragraph, we'll just hit enter, bold and capitalize the F, and then just write figure 1, then hit enter again, unbold it, and now we're going to italics and writing the title of our graph. So here it's differences between online and face-to-face student engagement scores. That title of the graph is telling me exactly what I'm looking at. So it's looking at the differences between my group 1 and group 2, my online and my face-to-face students. Differences in what? Student engagement scores. So that title tells me exactly what this graph is showing me. And then the graph itself. So it's just immediately underneath it. I just copied and pasted it as a picture into Excel. How you can do that is when you select the paste options, it's not going to have it now because I don't have a picture, or I don't have a graph copied. Oh God. Oh, that's the Zoom code. Ooh. But it'll have a paste as picture option. That'll avoid the issue that we have on the instructions, which I will update, where it's just a blank graph. But you'll notice that my graph is from a 0 to 7 scale. So it starts at 0, it goes to 7. I have X and Y axes labels here of class type and engagement scores. I have my groups are already there because that is based on how I've set up the graph. When I selected the online and face-to-face and the means right next to them, selecting those 4 cells will ensure that these online and face-to-face bars are labeled. It cuts a lot of pain in the ass out of your ass later. I don't know. It's just easier if you set it up that way, which I've showed you guys how to do that way. We also don't have those grid lines in the center. The only thing in the middle of this graph is just the bars. These axes are black and solid color. Perfect. So that is the practice. It might sound intimidating, this write-up, but and if you intend on taking 144, if you're a psych major or want to continue in the psych major, whenever you take research methods, which is Psych 144, you'll have to write a results section. It can be intimidating, but honestly, break it down to its simplest bits. This is a results section. And what the GE assessment, what this intends to do, what this assignment is meant for to teach you guys is just how to analyze statistics. So that is the analyzing in an Excel, interpreting those results. So not only determining what to do, what it tells you, oh, we reject or we retain the null, but interpreting those results, going from, oh, we rejected the null to, oh, face-to-face students have higher levels of student engagement than online students. And then just kind of displaying that data. That's what the visualization is for. That's what the graph is for. And just talking about the implications or the practical applications of those results. These are all things that are required in any APA style results section. And for this class, obviously we're only focused on the results section. That's all we're writing here. But I mean, I have a lot of students in my 144 class nervous about writing a results section, which it can be, but if you boil it down to its basic parts, it's pretty straightforward as long as you just know what goes where and how to say it. So with all of that being said, are there any questions? Okay, so for the activity, all you guys are going to do, like I said, you'll be turning in the activity online. So the activity 8 submission is in our week 12 module for Canvas. So we're the same spot where you'll see ANOVA, our lectures for this week. You'll also see activity 8. All activity 8 is you'll respond to it in a text box. So there's 2 questions that are in that you're supposed to respond to, and you'll just type up your answers there. But it's just, which are you going to choose, the independent or dependent samples prompt for this? And then just if you have any questions, this is going to be due, I believe it'll be next Monday at 11:59 p.m. So really simple. Just look over the GE assignment. This activity 8 is referring to the GE assignment. So that's what I'm referring to when there's any questions. Maybe you look at it over the weekend, or you're doing the activity Monday night and you're thinking, oh, wow, looking over this GE assignment, I actually do have a question that I didn't think about in, on Thursday in lecture. Well, just put it in the activity. That's totally fine. We'll answer it. But yeah, the activity this week is fairly straightforward, just answering one question and then potentially asking questions. But again, you'll find that in the week 12 module. The GE assignment is due September. Wow, no. It is due December 6th. In the GE assignment module, you'll see that the submission link is already up. But that will be, this assignment is due, the GE assignment is due December 6th at 11:59 p.m. You will submit that not only in that submission link through our Canvas, through Psych 42, through, Professor Cooper's Canvas, but also to your e-portfolio. Again, I do not have access to that. I am not going to turn in your assignment to you into your GE portfolio. I don't have access to it. So it's your responsibility to make sure you submit this assignment to both myself and to your e-portfolio. Another thing I want to note as well, I do not need the Excel sheet. You are only turning in the write-up, that the Word document containing the 1 through 6 outline, and writing that in a proper APA style kind of results section, as well as including the graph with the figure and the title underneath it. That is what I'm looking for. I do not need you to turn in the Excel worksheet. I also don't need you to turn in the Excel worksheet to the e-portfolio. So it's only the write-up that I'm going to be grading. Okay. Any other questions before we conclude today's meeting? All righty. So
I have a question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
of course.
Sorry,
No,
sorry,
no,
sorry.
no.
If we need help with a GE portfolio assignment, would you be able to help us, or do we have to do it on ourselves, all of it?
So you can certainly ask questions. Now, in terms of me doing it for you, I'm not going to do that. But if you have questions, if you started, maybe you're struggling with the Excel portion, if you come to my office hours and say like, hey, I started it and I'm stuck, or if you need me to double check it, make sure you did it right, I can do that, but I'm not going to do it for you. But I mean, that's to be expected.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Again, this GE assignment is going to be due December 6th. So you have a little less than a month. Honestly, though, the sooner you start it, the sooner you'll know if you'll have questions, because there's nothing worse than maybe starting it December 6th at like 10 o'clock and then you have questions, but it's too late because it's like 11:30 when you email me and I'm not going to respond within 19 minutes to you. Sorry, but I'm probably sleeping at 11:30 or certainly not working. But I would certainly suggest starting this sooner. That way, if you have questions, you can ask them. In terms of where the data, the Excel data is, all of the appropriate worksheets are in the GE module on Canvas. So you'll find not only the instructions that I went over to start the class today, but also the 2 separate Excel data sheets. Again, you don't have to do both the independent and dependent. You choose one based on the prompts that were in the instructions, as well as the submission for the assignment itself. All of that is in the GE assignment module. Yeah. Not a problem. Okay. So what I suggest, if that's all the questions that you all have for me, what I suggest is that all of you open up your week 12 module, click on activity 8 and just do that. It's it shouldn't take you very long. If you have questions that maybe you don't feel comfortable asking, or I don't know, that you realize after the fact, you can ask them in that activity there as well. But just get that taken care of. Again, activity 8, which is just our little in-class activity that's just referring to our lecture today, which is essentially our lecture about the GE assignment. That is due, the activity 8 is due by next Tuesday, technically next Monday at 11:59 p.m. And again, the GE assignment, which we've spent all class talking about, that is due December 6th at 11:59 p.m. But if that is all you have for me, that is all I have for you. I hope you guys are staying healthy, a hell of a lot healthier than I am. My voice hasn't cracked, so I'm looking better. Can't stand for long periods of time, but I'm slowly but surely working up that strength. But I hope you all stay healthy, and I will post this video in the GE assignment module in Canvas. So the same spot you'll find the instructions and the Excel sheets. This video will be in there as well. Just give me a moment, or well, several moments for the video to download and for me to upload to Canvas. So yeah, it won't be up immediately, but it will be up certainly by tomorrow. I have no questions about that. So if that's all the questions you have for me, I will see you all next Tuesday. I thank you. I hope I feel even better enough to stand on 2 feet for long periods of time. I wish you all the best of weekends, and I'll see you all next Tuesday.
Bye. Have a good weekend.
Bye. Thank you. You too.
Bye, feel better.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Bye.